I learned very early in life how to make myself small. Not because I wanted to, but because it made things easier for everyone else. If I stayed quiet, dinners ended faster. If I smiled politely, arguments didn't start. If I never talked about myself, no one could tell me how disappointing I was. My name is Agnes Drayton, and in my family, I was the background noise. The extra chair. The one you forget to count. This dinner was supposed to be special. My parents said it was a family celebration, which really meant a performance. A night to display success like trophies on a shelf. A night where worth was measured in job titles, salaries, and how impressed strangers would be. The house smelled like roasted meat and expensive wine. Crystal glasses were lined up like soldiers. The table stretched longer than usual, extended just enough to separate the important people from the rest. I already knew where I'd be sitting, at the far end, again. I arrived early, as I always did. Being early gave me something useful to do, helping in the kitchen, refilling glasses, staying busy enough not to be noticed. My mother barely glanced at me when I walked in. "You're wearing that?" she asked, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I looked down at my dress. Simple, clean, comfortable. "Yes," I said quietly. She sighed, the kind of sigh that carries years of disappointment. "You could at least try," she muttered, turning back to the oven. "Try to what? Look richer? Look more impressive? Look like someone worth bragging about?" I didn't ask. I never did. My father was already in the dining room, adjusting place cards. He didn't greet me, just pointed toward the end of the table without looking up. "Your seat's there." Of course it was. I placed myself carefully into that chair, the one closest to the wall, the one slightly apart from the rest. If I leaned back too far, my shoulders brushed the cold paint. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. That's what I was good at. Waiting. Daniel arrived next, my older brother. Loud, confident, successful in all the ways my parents understood. He walked in talking, already mid-sentence, as if the room had been holding its breath for him. "And my manager said the promotion is basically guaranteed," he announced, tossing his coat onto a chair. My father's face lit up. "That's my son." Margaret followed shortly after, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect life, at least from the outside. She kissed the air near my mother's cheek and immediately began listing things she'd purchased recently, as if reciting achievements. No one acknowledged me, not even a nod. When dinner was finally served, the room filled with voices overlapping each other. Laughter, bragging, comparisons disguised as conversation. I focused on my plate. Daniel talked numbers. Margaret talked status. My parents soaked it in like proof they'd done something right. Then, inevitably, the conversation drifted toward me. It always did. "So," my father said, cutting into his steak. "Agnes." The room quieted slightly. Not because they cared, but because this part was always uncomfortable. "Still doing volunteer work?" he asked. Volunteer work. That was his favorite way to erase me. "I work full-time," I replied calmly, "in community support." Margaret smiled thinly. "That's a nice way of saying you don't make much money." A few chuckles followed. I felt heat rise to my face, but I didn't let it show. Years of practice had taught me how to keep my voice steady. "I make enough," I said. My mother shook her head. "Enough for what? You're not married. You don't own anything. You don't even talk about your future." I swallowed, because if I talked about my future, they'd laugh. And if I talked about my present, they wouldn't understand. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You know, Dad keeps saying you just need motivation. Some ambition." Ambition. Another word they use like a weapon. "I'm ambitious," I said quietly. They laughed. Not cruel laughter. Worse, dismissive laughter. My father finally looked directly at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was tired, as if my existence itself exhausted him. You're not getting any younger, Agnes, he said. At some point, you need to be something. Something. The word echoed in my chest, because right now, to them, I was nothing. I stared at my plate, letting the moment pass the way I always did. If I stayed silent long enough, the attention would move on. And it did. They returned to their stories, their wins, their lives. I remained at the edge of the table, invisible again. But what they didn't know, what they had never known, was that my silence had never meant emptiness. It meant restraint. Because I had learned a long time ago that the things I was proud of didn't fit into their world. After dinner, dessert was served. My mother brought out a cake decorated with gold lettering. Not for anyone's birthday, just because it looked impressive. As plates were passed around, the doorbell rang. My father frowned. Who would come this late? My mother wiped her hands and went to answer it. Moments later, she returned with someone behind her. Father Michael, the family priest. Conversation stopped completely. Oh, Father, my mother said, startled but pleased. What a surprise! He smiled warmly. I hope I'm not intruding. Of course not, my father said quickly, standing. Please, join us. Father Michael's eyes moved around the table, then landed on me, and unlike everyone else, he smiled directly at me. Agnes, he said gently. It's good to see you. I nodded. It's good to see you too, Father. Margaret leaned toward Daniel and whispered, Since when does she know him like that? Daniel shrugged, confused. Father Michael took a seat near the center of the table, one of the good seats. My parents were practically glowing with pride to have him there. We were just sharing family accomplishments, my father said, lifting his glass. Perhaps you'd like to offer a blessing. Father Michael nodded. In a moment, he said. But first, if you'll allow me. The room grew quiet. I came tonight because I wanted to thank someone, he continued. Someone who has done extraordinary things without ever seeking recognition. My mother smiled, clearly assuming he meant her. I've spent many years in service, Father Michael said, and I've learned that the most meaningful generosity is often invisible. My heart began to beat faster. I've seen donors come and go, he continued, but very few give consistently, quietly, faithfully. His gaze shifted toward me. And Agnes, he said, his voice steady, is one of those people. Silence fell over the table like a heavy blanket. She has personally funded the orphanage for 7 years, he said. Education, medical care, expansion, all of it. Time seemed to stop. Margaret's fork slipped from her hand. Daniel stared. What? My father slowly lowered his glass. She never wanted her name mentioned, Father Michael added. But the children know her. They pray for her. My mother's lips trembled. What? I finally spoke. I didn't think it mattered, I said softly. The room was frozen, and for the first time in my life, every single person at that table was looking at me, not with disappointment, but with shock. The room was silent in a way that felt almost unnatural. The clinking of forks against plates had stopped. The murmur of conversation vanished. Even the faint hum of the chandelier above seemed to pause. I could feel every eye on me. Not the usual dismissive glances, or the polite nods, or the quiet judgment I'd learned to live with. No, this was something new, something heavier. Father Michael's words hung in the air. She has personally funded the orphanage for 7 years. Education, medical care, expansion, all of it. I shifted slightly in my chair. trying to stay calm. My pulse was racing, but my face betrayed nothing. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind thousands of times, not because I wanted recognition, but because I had always known that one day the truth would matter. Margaret's fork fell onto her plate with a loud clatter. Her eyes were wide. A flush spread across her cheeks. Anger, embarrassment, confusion. Daniel's jaw tightened. My father's face was pale, his hand shaking slightly as he set down his glass. They didn't know how to process this information, and I didn't need to explain myself. 7 years, Margaret finally whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. You've been doing this all this time? I nodded gently. Yes. It was a simple truth, stripped of pride, stripped of arrogance. I wasn't looking for their approval. I wasn't asking for applause. I was simply telling the truth. Daniel scoffed, a nervous, short sound. You mean to tell us that while we've been working our careers, paying our mortgages, managing investments, you've been giving all your money away? It's not about money, I said calmly. It's about lives, children's lives. Children's lives, my father echoed, his voice low, incredulous. He leaned back in his chair, staring at me as if I'd suddenly grown into someone he didn't recognize. You could have told us. Any of us. We could have helped. I shook my head softly. You wouldn't have understood. You've never cared about what can't be measured in dollars or status. A tense silence followed. Even Father Michael, who had witnessed countless family dramas over the years, didn't speak immediately. He let the weight of the moment settle, letting the family face their own reflections. Finally, my mother whispered, almost inaudibly, "But why? Why not tell anyone? Why keep this a secret?" Because I had always known. They would never value it. The kind of legacy I built, quiet, selfless, unshouted, was invisible to them. And that invisibility was a shield, protecting both myself and the children who depended on me. Because recognition isn't the point, I said. Helping these children, giving them opportunities I never had, that's all the reward I need. Daniel's hands clenched into fists on the table. You mean to tell me that while we were all trying to impress each other, you were actually changing lives? Yes, I said simply. And I didn't need anyone's approval to do it. Margaret leaned back, crossing her arms tightly. This isn't fair, she muttered. Her voice was sharp, defensive, a shield she didn't even know she was holding up. I've worked hard, just like everyone else. And now you come in and act like what you've done makes us look small? It's not about you, I said. It never was. Father Michael nodded solemnly. This is exactly why I brought it up tonight. Because sometimes people need to see the truth before they understand it. My father's face hardened, his pride wounded in ways I'd never seen before. You've spent all these years, and you never asked for anything in return. You never even considered your own family. I did consider my family, I said softly. Just not the kind of family that measures love in prestige and income. The words stung, but I could see the cracks forming. The carefully built facade of superiority that had held my family together for decades was beginning to crumble. They didn't know how to respond to humility paired with impact. They didn't know how to face someone whose worth couldn't be debated or diminished. Margaret's lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Daniel's fists relaxed slightly, though his jaw remained tight. My mother stared, unblinking, as if she were trying to memorize a version of me she had never seen before. My father's hands shook on the table, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Father Michael spoke again. You raised a remarkable woman, and tonight, it's time you recognized it. The room was quiet, but the tension was thick. I had not come to this dinner seeking validation. I had not come to demand apologies. I had come to reveal the truth. And now that the truth was out, everything had changed. Not for me, for them. And the most difficult part was still coming. Because truth has a way of demanding confrontation. Because they couldn't ignore it, and they wouldn't forgive it easily. Because love, sacrifice, and quiet strength don't fit neatly into their world. And the moment they realized that would define the rest of the night. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the chandelier above seemed to hang lower, as if it too was waiting for the family to confront a truth too large to ignore. Margaret finally broke the silence. Her voice was sharp, trembling with anger and disbelief. "You mean to tell me that all this time, you've been quietly doing what none of us could do?" "Yes," I said softly. "It wasn't about competition. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone." Daniel slammed his fist lightly on the table, startling everyone. "This isn't fair. We've been busting our asses for years. Careers, investments, promotions. And you've been saving lives." I shook my head. "It's not about fairness. It's about priorities. You chose to impress people like us. I chose to help people who really needed me." My father leaned back in his chair, pale and silent, his fingers drumming nervously against the table. You've been doing all this while we thought you were nothing?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying a mix of disbelief and guilt. "Yes," I said simply. "I was nothing in your eyes, but in theirs, I was everything." My mother's hands were pressed to her lips. "Why didn't you ever tell us? Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because," I said, looking at each of them in turn, "I knew you wouldn't understand. Your definition of success has never included love or sacrifice. And I didn't need your approval to do what was right." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every gesture. "So all these years, all the dinners, the teasing, the dismissals, they meant nothing?" "They only meant what you allowed them to mean," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And tonight, it stops meaning anything." Margaret's lips quivered, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in her eyes. She had always been the confident one, the one who thrived on comparison and recognition. Now she looked small, and that was my quiet victory. Father Michael cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. "You raised a woman who changed lives quietly, consistently, and without expectation. And it's high time that truth was seen." My father's gaze dropped to the table, his jaw tightening. I can't believe I didn't notice." His voice was low, almost ashamed. "You've been right in front of me, and I couldn't see it." I felt no anger toward him, only a quiet sadness. This was the culmination of years of neglect, misunderstanding, and misplaced values. It was not my job to force them to see. It was theirs to learn. Margaret finally spoke, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I feel embarrassed, angry, and confused." "That's normal," I said gently. "You've lived your life in a mirror, reflecting what everyone else told you was important. I lived mine in the real world, seeing what truly matters." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, the kids at the orphanage, they actually know you?" I nodded. "They call me their guardian, their benefactor, their friend. And they pray for me, not because they have to, but because they love me." The room fell silent again, this time heavier, thicker. No one could argue with that. No one could mock it, not when confronted with the lives I had touched. My mother finally whispered, almost a breath, I don't understand why we didn't see it before." "Because love doesn't always announce itself," I said. And sometimes, the people who give quietly are the strongest among us. Daniel's voice softened, his earlier frustration replaced with a hesitant respect. You've done more than any of us. More than all of us combined. I shook my head. It's never been a competition. I've never needed to be better than you. I only needed to do what was right. Margaret looked down at her plate, shame and reflection battling in her eyes. You don't even ask for thanks, do you? No, I said. I never have. I never will. The children are enough. Their lives are enough. Father Michael's gaze swept the table, landing on each family member in turn. And that is the lesson here. Worth is not measured by accolades or recognition. True legacy is built in silence, with compassion, integrity, and love. The words hung in the air like a tangible presence. My father's hands, which had been clenched tightly moments ago, finally relaxed. Daniel's shoulders sagged, the tension leaving him slowly. Margaret's gaze lifted, tentative, as if she were seeing me for the first time. Even my mother seemed to shrink, her eyes reflecting a mixture of guilt and awe. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I no longer needed them to validate me. I never had. What mattered was the truth, and the truth had finally been seen. I looked around the table, taking in the stunned faces of my family. The people who had once dismissed me as nothing were now confronted with the reality of my life, my choices, and my quiet strength. It was not revenge. It was revelation. And it was far more satisfying than anything I could have imagined. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this was only the beginning. The revelations, the guilt, the shame, the self-reflection, they would not resolve in one night. The family would have to live with this truth, and that would be its own challenge. Because seeing the truth is easy. Understanding it is far harder. And as I sat there, my heart steady and calm, I knew that the next steps, how they processed this, how they changed, would define everything that came next. And for the first time, I felt the quiet power of knowing I was enough. I had always been enough. And nothing they said or did could ever take that away. The air was heavy with unsaid words. No one moved. No one spoke. After the revelations of the night, the family had retreated into their own thoughts, each of them grappling with truths they had long ignored. My mother sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the table as if seeing it for the first time. My father's face was etched with a mixture of regret and confusion. Margaret looked down at her plate, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. Daniel, perhaps the loudest and most impatient of them all, sat quietly, his usual confidence gone, replaced with a tentative humility. I could feel their eyes on me, even as they avoided direct contact. But I did not flinch. I did not look away. I was not the one who had anything to hide anymore. Father Michael cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "This is a rare moment," he said softly. "A moment when the truth cannot be ignored, and the consequences of our blindness are laid bare. Let this be a lesson, not in shame, but in understanding." I watched as my family shifted uncomfortably. The lesson was theirs to learn. I had learned mine long ago. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Agnes, I didn't know. I never understood. I am sorry." Her apology hung in the air, tentative, fragile. It was not the apology I had longed for as a child. It was something different, something real, something earned. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mother. That's enough for now." My father, who had remained silent, finally looked up, his eyes wet with unspoken emotions. I failed you," he admitted. "I thought I was raising you right. I thought I was teaching you about success. But I see now I was wrong. You have always been strong, wise, and generous beyond measure." I did not respond immediately. I let the words settle, letting him feel the weight of what he had missed all these years. And I let the silence do what words could not. Daniel leaned forward, his voice quieter than usual. I didn't understand before. I thought my work mattered most. But seeing what you've done, the lives you've touched, I can't even begin to compare. I respect you, Agnes. Truly." Margaret remained silent, her hands fidgeting, her gaze fixed on the table. Finally she spoke, her voice small but sincere. I'm proud of you. I don't know why I didn't see it before. I'm sorry for doubting you." I nodded once, faintly, letting their words wash over me. It was not satisfaction. It was closure. It was the recognition I had never demanded, but now received, not as an entitlement, but as an acknowledgement of truth. Father Michael smiled, his eyes kind and knowing. This is the moment when love and humility triumph over pride and ego. Take it in, learn from it, and let it guide your family moving forward. The room remained quiet after he spoke. It was a different kind of silence now, one of reflection, not tension. A silence that held space for understanding, for change, for growth. I rose from my chair, moving toward the doorway. "Good night," I said softly, my voice steady, calm. I did not wait for them to respond. I did not need them to speak. My place in the world was no longer defined by their opinions or their recognition. It was defined by my choices, my actions, and the lives I had touched. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The city lights stretched before me, indifferent yet comforting, like a quiet witness to my life. I breathed in deeply, savoring the stillness, the freedom, the knowledge that I had always been enough. Behind me, the house remained lit, warm and familiar, filled with the people I had loved and who had finally begun to understand. They would never be the same again. Some would embrace the change, some would resist it, but the truth would remain, unshakable, undeniable, and quietly powerful. And in that truth, I found my peace. Because worth is not measured by applause. It is not measured by recognition. It is measured by the lives you touch, the love you give, and the courage to stand silently, steadfast, even when the world overlooks you. I walked further into the night, each step lighter than the last. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the city and of possibility. I knew that the orphanage, the children, and the quiet choices I had made were my true legacy. Not the approval of a family that had once dismissed me, not the judgment of those who had measured me by superficial standards, but the impact of a life lived with quiet dignity and selfless devotion. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Not for anyone else, not for recognition, but because I had finally claimed the truth of who I was. I was not nothing. I had never been nothing. And no one could ever take that away. The night stretched before me, open and unending. And I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges or triumphs awaited, I would face them with the quiet strength I had always carried within me. Because the world does not always see those who do the most. But those who do the most never need it to see them. And in that, I found my victory.